The wind howled across the San Juan Mountains with a fury that seemed almost alive, carrying with it the scent of death and secrets buried deep beneath Colorado's frozen peaks. It was March of 1894 when railroad surveyor Thomas Hartwell made the discovery that would haunt him until his dying day. Following what should have been a routine inspection of potential railroads through the high country, Hartwell stumbled upon a cluster of cabins nestled in a remote valley, cabins that contained evidence of something far more sinister than winter's usual cruelties. The structures stood like tombstones against the white landscape, their roofs sagging under months of accumulated snow. But it wasn't the abandoned buildings that made Hartwell's blood run cold. It was what he found inside them, and more disturbing still, what he didn't find. 14 men had vanished without a trace during the brutal winter of 1893, leaving behind a scene so puzzling and unnerving that it would spark one of Colorado's most enduring mysteries. Before we continue, if you enjoy uncovering these dark and forgotten chapters of history, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and tell us in the comments which state you're listening from. Your support helps us bring more of these stories to light. The story begins not with the disappearance itself, but with the ambitious dreams that drew these men into the unforgiving wilderness in the first place. In the autumn of 1892, tales of a rich silver strike in the San Juans had reached the mining camps of Leadville and Cripple Creek. Unlike the exaggerated rumors that constantly swept through Colorado's mining communities, this one came with compelling evidence. Ore samples that assayed at nearly 40 ounces of silver per ton, and detailed maps sketched by a dying prospector named Wilhelm Koerner. Koerner had stumbled into Silverton that September, half dead from exposure, and clutching a leather satchel containing what he claimed were the keys to untold wealth. The German immigrant spoke of a hidden valley where silver veins ran through the mountainsides like frozen lightning, accessible only through a treacherous pass that most men would never dare attempt. Before he succumbed to pneumonia in the town's makeshift hospital, Koerner sold his maps and mineral samples to a consortium of investors for the considerable sum of $800. The consortium was led by Marcus Thorne, a former Union Army captain who had made his fortune in the California gold fields before moving to Colorado. Thorne was known throughout the territory as a meticulous planner and shrewd judge of character. He handpicked 13 men to join him in what he called the greatest mining venture the San Juans have ever seen. These weren't desperate greenhorns chasing fool's gold, but experienced miners, skilled tradesmen, and hardy frontiersmen who understood the risks of high-altitude prospecting. Among them were the Kellerman brothers, Hans and Fritz, German immigrants who had worked the silver mines of Nevada for nearly a decade. There was Black Jack Morrison, a former railroad engineer whose knowledge of explosives made him invaluable for blasting operations. Samuel Reed brought medical training from his years as an army surgeon, while Joseph Crane contributed his skills as a carpenter and his reputation for being able to build shelter in even the most challenging conditions. The youngest member of the expedition was Timothy Walsh, barely 22 years old, but already seasoned by 3 years of hard labor in the Comstock lode. Walsh had joined the group against the wishes of his fiancée, Sarah McKenna, who begged him to wait until spring. "The mountains will still be there come May," she pleaded, but Walsh was convinced that waiting would mean losing their claim to other prospectors. His last letter to Sarah, dated October 15, 1892, spoke of his excitement about the venture and his promise to return by Christmas with enough silver to buy them a proper house in Denver. The expedition departed Silverton on October 20, 1892, their pack train loaded with supplies intended to last through the winter: barrels of salt pork, sacks of flour and beans, medical supplies, mining equipment, lumber for construction, and enough ammunition to hunt game and defend themselves if necessary. Local merchants estimated the value of their supplies at over $3,000, a fortune that demonstrated just how seriously Thorne took this venture. The route to their destination led through some of the most treacherous terrain in Colorado. Following Koerner's maps, they would need to traverse Engineer Pass, climb to an elevation of nearly 11,000 feet, and then descend into what the dying prospector had called Devil's Valley, a name that locals found ominous but Thorne dismissed as superstition. The journey took 8 days, longer than expected due to early snow that made the narrow mountain trails treacherous for their heavily loaded pack animals. Several times they were forced to rope themselves together and inch along ledges barely wide enough for a single man. But when they finally reached their destination on October 28th, even the most skeptical members of the group had to admit that Corner's maps had been accurate. The valley was a natural fortress, surrounded on 3 sides by towering granite walls and accessible only through the narrow pass they had just navigated. A clear stream ran down its center, fed by springs that would provide fresh water even in the depths of winter. Most importantly, the exposed rock faces showed clear evidence of mineral veins, dark streaks running through the lighter stone that experienced eyes recognized as potential silver deposits. Thorn immediately set the men to work establishing their base camp. Using lumber they had packed in and timber cut from the surrounding forest, they constructed 3 substantial cabins arranged in a rough triangle around a central fire pit. The largest cabin served as a communal dining hall and meeting place, while the 2 smaller structures provided sleeping quarters. Each building was constructed with double walls packed with pine needles for insulation, and equipped with stone fireplaces that could burn the abundant deadfall found throughout the valley. By mid-November, they had also built a stable for their pack animals, a storage shed for their supplies, and even a small assay office where they could test ore samples. The camp was as comfortable and well-equipped as any mining operation in Colorado, a testament to Thorn's careful planning and the skills of his men. The first weeks of prospecting exceeded their wildest expectations. Test shafts sunk into the valley's walls revealed silver ore that assayed at even higher concentrations than Corner's samples had suggested. By December, they had identified at least 3 major veins that promised to yield hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of silver once full-scale mining operations could begin in the spring. Their success was documented in a series of letters and journal entries that would later be found in the abandoned camp. Thorn wrote to his wife in Denver, "Margaret, my dearest, we have struck it richer than I dared hope. The Lord has blessed our venture beyond measure. By spring we shall want for nothing." Hans Kellerman's diary, written in a mixture of English and German, recorded daily progress with methodical precision. November 23rd, shaft 3 extended to 15 feet. Ore quality remains excellent. Fritz believes we have found the mother lode. But even as their mining prospects brightened, the men began to notice disturbing signs that all was not well in their isolated valley. The first hint of trouble came in early December, when their pack animals began displaying signs of extreme agitation. Horses that had been calm and reliable during the journey to the valley now reared and whinnied at shadows, refusing to venture near certain areas of the camp after dark. Joseph Crane, whose carpentry skills had made him the camp's unofficial maintenance supervisor, noted in his journal that tools and supplies began disappearing with alarming frequency. December 8th, another pickaxe gone missing overnight. That makes 3 this week. The men are starting to blame each other, but I've seen how careful we all are with equipment. Something else is taking our things. More troubling still were the sounds that began to disturb their sleep. Timothy Walsh wrote to his fiancée about strange noises in the night, like voices calling from the forest, but speaking words in no language any of us recognize. Samuel Reed, with his medical training, initially dismissed these reports as symptoms of altitude sickness or cabin fever. But by mid-December, even he was forced to acknowledge that something unusual was happening in their valley. The winter of 1892-93 arrived early and with unprecedented severity. By December 20th, snow had already accumulated to depths of 4 feet, and temperatures regularly dropped below zero. The men found themselves confined to their cabins for days at a time, venturing out only to tend their animals and gather firewood. It was during these long, dark nights that the psychological pressure began to take its toll. Black Jack Morrison, normally the most jovial member of the group, became increasingly withdrawn and paranoid. He accused other members of the expedition of stealing his personal belongings and plotting against him. Hans Kellerman wrote in his diary, "Jack speaks of conspiracies where none exist. He sits by the fire cleaning his rifle over and over, watching the rest of us with suspicious eyes. Fritz says we should take his weapons, but Thorne believes it would only make things worse. By January, the situation had deteriorated further. The mysterious disappearances of tools and supplies continued, but now personal items were vanishing as well: clothing, letters from home, even food from individual rations. More disturbing still, several men reported seeing figures moving in the forest at night, shadowy forms that seemed to watch the camp from just beyond the circle of firelight. Timothy Walsh's final letter to Sarah McKenna, dated January 10, 1893, painted a picture of a group of men slowly unraveling under pressure. "My darling Sarah, I fear I may not return to you as soon as I hoped. Something is wrong in this place, though I cannot say what. The other men speak in whispers now, and we eye each other with suspicion. Captain Thorne tries to maintain order, but even he seems troubled. I have hidden this letter in my trunk, for I no longer trust that our mail is private." The last entry in any of the journals found at the camp was written by Samuel Reed on January 15, 1893. The situation has become untenable. 3 men are missing from morning roll call: Morrison, the younger Kellerman, and Walsh. Their beds were slept in. Their belongings remain, but they are simply gone. Captain Thorne has organized search parties, but the storm makes it impossible to track anything in this snow. God help us all. What happened next would remain a mystery that haunted Colorado for generations. When Thomas Hartwell discovered the camp 15 months later, he found a scene that defied explanation. The 3 cabins stood intact but empty, their doors unlocked and swinging in the mountain wind. Inside, the investigators found evidence of hasty departure. Meals left half-eaten on tables, clothes scattered on beds, personal belongings abandoned where they had been dropped. But it was the details that made the discovery truly unsettling. In the main cabin, 14 place settings were arranged around the central table, as if the men had been preparing for a final meal together. The plates contained frozen remnants of what appeared to be a feast: roasted meat, vegetables, even what looked like a cake. Bottles of whiskey, still partially full, sat at each place setting. It was as if the entire group had simply vanished in the middle of their dinner. More puzzling still was the condition of the camp itself. Despite being abandoned for over a year, the buildings showed no signs of animal intrusion or weather damage beyond what would be expected. The stables still contained the skeletal remains of the pack animals, but they appeared to have died of starvation rather than predation or disease. Most mysteriously, the camp supply shed remained fully stocked with food, tools, and mining equipment. Resources that could have sustained the men for months longer if they had chosen to use them. Hartwell's initial report to the territorial authorities in Denver described finding personal effects and documentation belonging to 14 individuals, but no trace of the individuals themselves, living or deceased. A more thorough investigation was launched immediately, led by Deputy Marshal William Crawford and including experienced trackers, mining engineers, and even a physician to examine any remains that might be discovered. The investigation team spent 3 weeks combing every inch of the valley and the surrounding mountainsides. They found no graves, no bodies, no evidence of violence or struggle. The snow had long since melted and refrozen multiple times, eliminating any possibility of tracking the men's movements after their disappearance. Most baffling of all, there was no indication that the men had attempted to leave the valley. Their heavy winter clothing remained in the cabins, and their pack animals had died in the stables. Dr. Harrison Mills, the physician attached to the investigation, noted several disturbing details in his official report. The arrangement of personal effects suggests a degree of organization inconsistent with panic or emergency departure. Clothing is folded, weapons are properly stored, and valuable items remain undisturbed. Yet the evidence also suggests that whatever caused these men to abandon their camp happened suddenly, without time for proper preparation. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries, hit that like button to support our work, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. The investigation uncovered one particularly chilling piece of evidence that would fuel speculation for decades to come. Hidden beneath loose floorboards in the main cabin, Deputy Marshal Crawford discovered a leather-bound journal that had not been mentioned in any of the initial reports. The journal belonged to Marcus Thorne himself, and its final entries painted a picture of a man slowly losing his grip on reality. Thorne's handwriting, normally precise and controlled, became increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. His final entry, dated January 16, 1893, consisted of a single sentence repeated over and over again. "They are calling us home. They are calling us home. They are calling us home." The phrase filled 3 full pages, the handwriting becoming more frenzied with each repetition. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was made by mining engineer Robert Ashford, who had been brought in to assess the value of the claims the men had been working. When Ashford examined the test shafts and mining sites, he made a discovery that cast doubt on everything the investigation had uncovered so far. The silver veins that had supposedly drawn the men to the valley simply didn't exist. "I have examined every excavation in this valley," Ashford reported, "and found no evidence of significant mineral deposits. The ore samples allegedly found here could not have come from this location. Either these men were the victims of an elaborate fraud, or something far stranger was at work in this place." The implications of Ashford's findings were staggering. If there had never been any silver in the valley, then what had kept 14 experienced miners there through the brutal winter? What had they been mining for 4 months? And most importantly, what had convinced them to remain in such an isolated location when they must have realized they were chasing a phantom? The investigation officially concluded in May of 1894 with a finding of death by misadventure under unknown circumstances. The territorial government seized the abandoned mining claims and equipment to settle debts owed by the expedition, but the mystery of what had happened to the 14 men remained unsolved. In the years that followed, the story of the frozen camp became legend throughout Colorado's mining communities. Prospectors and hunters who ventured into the San Juan Mountains reported strange sightings in the area lights moving through the forest at night, the sound of men's voices carried on the wind, and most disturbing of all, the occasional discovery of mining equipment scattered in remote locations far from any known claims. Sarah McKenna, Timothy Walsh's fiancée, never married. She spent years writing letters to territorial and federal authorities, demanding renewed investigations into her beloved's disappearance. Her correspondence, preserved in the Colorado State Archives, reveals a woman consumed by grief and desperate for answers that would never come. Her final letter, written to the governor of Colorado in 1910, contained a haunting plea: "17 years have passed, and still I wake each morning hoping to hear Timothy's voice calling my name. Please, I beg you, do not let these men be forgotten." The abandoned valley itself seemed to resist human presence. Several attempts were made to establish new mining operations in the area, but each effort ended in failure. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Workers reported feeling constantly watched, and more than one expedition was forced to abandon their efforts after members of their crew simply walked away from their jobs without explanation. Local Native American tribes, particularly the Ute people who had hunted in the San Juans for generations, had their own explanations for what had happened in the valley. Tribal elders spoke of ancient warnings about certain places in the mountains where the spirits of the dead could call the living to join them. According to these beliefs, the valley had been marked as forbidden long before any white men had ever set foot in Colorado. Chief Running Bear of the Southern Ute tribe, when asked about the disappearances by a Denver newspaper reporter in 1895, offered this cryptic response: "The mountains have their own laws, and men who do not respect them pay the price. Some places are meant to remain empty, meant to belong only to the spirits who dwell there." The white men thought they could take what they wanted, but the mountains took them instead. Modern researchers and historians have proposed numerous theories to explain the frozen camp mystery. Some suggest that the men fell victim to carbon monoxide poisoning from improperly ventilated heating systems, causing hallucinations and disorientation that led them to wander into the wilderness, where they perished. Others point to the possibility of ergot poisoning from contaminated grain supplies, which could have caused mass psychosis and bizarre behavior. The avalanche theory remains popular among those seeking rational explanations. Proponents argue that a massive snow slide could have buried the men so completely that their bodies were never recovered. while somehow leaving the camp buildings intact. However, geological surveys of the valley have found no evidence of avalanche activity in the area during the winter of 1892-93. Perhaps the most intriguing theory was proposed by Dr. Margaret Steinberg, a psychiatrist who studied the case in the 1960s. Dr. Steinberg suggested that the isolation, harsh conditions, and possible fraud regarding the silver claims created a perfect storm of psychological pressure that led to mass hysteria. In her analysis, the men may have collectively convinced themselves that leaving the valley was their only option, leading them to abandon their shelter and supplies in the middle of a blizzard. Group psychology under extreme stress can produce behaviors that appear irrational to outside observers. Dr. Steinberg wrote, "If these men believed they were in immediate danger, either from supernatural forces or from each other, they might have made the fatal decision to flee rather than remain in what they perceived as a trap. But for all the theories and speculation, certain facts remain undeniable and deeply troubling. 14 experienced frontiersmen, well-equipped and supplied for a winter in the mountains, vanished without leaving behind a single trace of their fate. Their camp was left in a condition that suggested sudden departure. Yet they took none of the supplies that would have been essential for survival in the wilderness." The mystery deepened in 1923, 30 years after the disappearance, when a Forest Service ranger named Daniel McKinnon reported finding human remains in a remote canyon nearly 20 miles from the abandoned camp. The skeletal remains of 3 individuals were discovered in a natural cave, along with fragments of clothing and equipment that appeared to match items listed in the original investigation reports. However, when anthropologist Dr. Charles Whitman examined the remains, his findings only added to the mystery. The bones showed signs of extreme malnutrition and what appeared to be deliberate mutilation. More disturbing still, Dr. Whitman determined that the remains were those of 2 adult males and 1 female, despite the fact that the missing prospectors had been an all-male group. These bones tell a story of suffering and violence, Dr. Whitman reported, but they do not appear to belong to the missing miners. The presence of female remains suggests either a completely different tragedy or that our understanding of the original disappearance is fundamentally flawed. The discovery of the cave remains sparked renewed interest in the case, but it also raised more questions than it answered. If the bones didn't belong to the missing miners, then who were these people, and how had they come to die in such a remote location? And if they did somehow relate to the frozen camp mystery, what did their presence reveal about the true nature of what had happened in that isolated valley? Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, the story of the frozen camp became a fixture of Colorado folklore, passed down through generations of miners, ranchers, and mountain men, each telling added new details and embellishments until it became difficult to separate fact from legend. Some versions of the story claimed that ghostly figures could still be seen working the abandoned mine shafts on moonless nights. Others insisted that the valley itself was cursed, doomed to claim the lives of anyone foolish enough to venture there. The Great Depression brought a renewed wave of prospectors to Colorado's mountains, as desperate men sought their fortunes in played-out claims and abandoned mining camps. Several groups attempted to work the claims in Devil's Valley, drawn by rumors that the original miners had discovered but never extracted vast quantities of silver. Without exception, these expeditions ended in failure, often accompanied by reports of equipment sabotage, mysterious accidents, and the same unsettling sense of being watched that had plagued the original prospectors. In 1934, a group of 5 men from Oklahoma spent 2 weeks in the valley before abandoning their efforts. Their leader, a former oil worker named Jack Patterson, gave an interview to the Durango Herald that provided one of the most detailed accounts of the valley's continuing strangeness. "We went in there thinking we were tough enough to handle whatever had spooked those old-timers back in the 90s. But I'm telling you, that place gets under your skin. You can't shake the feeling that you're not alone, that something's watching you from the trees. Tools would go missing overnight, and we'd find them scattered in places where none of us had been. The horses wouldn't settle, kept trying to bolt back toward the pass. By the end of the second week, my men were ready to mutiny if I didn't order a retreat. World War II brought a temporary end to treasure hunting expeditions in the remote Colorado mountains, as the nation's attention turned to more pressing matters. But the story of the frozen camp lived on in the memories of old-timers and the pages of local newspapers, waiting for a new generation to rediscover its mysteries. The modern era of investigation began in 1967, when a team of researchers from the University of Colorado launched the first scientific study of the disappearance, led by anthropologist Dr. Susan Mitchell and historian Dr. James Brennan. The team spent 3 summers conducting archaeological excavations in the valley, hoping to find evidence that earlier investigators had missed. Using metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar, the university team made several significant discoveries. They found the remains of the original camp buildings, now little more than foundation stones and rotting timber. They also uncovered a substantial cache of mining equipment buried beneath decades of accumulated soil and vegetation. Tools that appeared to have been deliberately hidden rather than simply abandoned. Most significantly, they discovered what appeared to be a 4th cabin, located nearly a quarter-mile from the main camp and completely unknown to previous investigators. This structure had been built into the side of a natural rock formation, making it nearly invisible unless approached from exactly the right angle. Inside, they found evidence of long-term habitation, sleeping areas, food storage, and most intriguingly, a collection of journals and papers that had somehow survived the intervening decades. The journals found in the hidden cabin were written in multiple hands, suggesting that several of the missing miners had used this location as a refuge or meeting place. The entries painted a picture of growing paranoia and desperation that went far beyond what had been revealed in the materials found at the main camp. One journal, apparently belonging to Samuel Reed, contained detailed observations about the psychological deterioration of his companions. January 12th. Morrison has not returned from his watch. Fritz found his rifle abandoned by the tree line, but no sign of the man himself. The others whisper that he has joined them, though none will say who they are. I begin to fear that our isolation has bred madness among us. Another journal, written in what appeared to be Timothy Walsh's hand, contained increasingly frantic entries about supernatural encounters. They come at night now, calling our names from the darkness. Hans swears he has seen his dead brother walking among the trees. I no longer trust my own eyes, for I have seen things that cannot be real. Yet they persist in my vision night after night. But the most disturbing discovery in the hidden cabin was a series of crude maps and diagrams that appeared to show the layout of underground tunnels and chambers beneath the valley floor. The maps were annotated with notes about the deep places and where they keep the others. Some of the diagrams showed what looked like human figures arranged in ritualistic patterns, though the meaning of these drawings remained unclear. Dr. Mitchell's team attempted to locate the underground chambers indicated in the maps, but their ground-penetrating radar detected no significant cavities beneath the valley floor. Either the maps were the product of deranged imagination, or the passages they depicted had been sealed or collapsed in the decades since they were drawn. The university investigation concluded in 1970 with a comprehensive report that acknowledged the team's failure to solve the mystery. Despite 3 years of intensive research, Dr. Mitchell wrote, "We have been unable to determine the fate of the 14 men who disappeared from this valley in 1893. The evidence we have uncovered suggests a complex situation involving psychological stress, possible fraud, and circumstances that may never be fully understood." The report did, however, make one recommendation that would prove prophetic. Given the documented history of accidents, equipment failures, and psychological disturbances associated with this location, we strongly advise against any future attempts to establish permanent human presence in the valley. This advice was ignored in 1978, when a group of investors from Texas purchased the mineral rights to the valley and launched the most ambitious mining operation the area had seen since the original disappearance. The Lone Star Mining Company brought in heavy equipment, modern communications gear, and a crew of 30 experienced miners determined to finally unlock the secrets of Devil's Valley. The operation lasted exactly 6 weeks. According to reports filed with the Colorado Bureau of Mines, The Lone Star expedition was plagued by a series of increasingly serious accidents and equipment failures. Drill bits snapped without explanation, generators failed repeatedly despite being brand new, and several workers reported severe psychological disturbances, including hallucinations and panic attacks. The final incident occurred on September 15, 1978, when 3 members of the crew, foreman Bill Henderson, equipment operator Miguel Santos, and geologist Dr. Patricia Wells, disappeared during a routine survey of the valley's eastern rim. Unlike the original 1893 disappearance, this time there were witnesses. According to the testimony of crew member Robert Chen, the 3 missing individuals had been working near the site of the hidden cabin discovered by the university team. Chen reported seeing them enter a stand of pine trees while conducting their survey, but when he looked again minutes later, they were gone. A search of the area found no trace of the missing workers, despite the fact that Chen had maintained visual contact with the location throughout the incident. "I watched them walk into those trees," Chen told investigators. "I looked down at my equipment for maybe 2 minutes, and when I looked up, they were gone. I called out, but there was no answer. It was like the forest had just swallowed them up." The Lone Star Mining Company immediately suspended operations and evacuated all personnel from the valley. The company's insurance investigation concluded that the disappearances were the result of unknown environmental hazards and refused to cover the substantial losses incurred by the failed operation. The 1978 disappearances brought renewed media attention to the frozen camp mystery, with newspapers across the country running sensational headlines about Colorado's cursed valley and the place where people vanish. Television documentaries and magazine articles explored various theories, from natural gas seeps that could cause hallucinations to undiscovered cave systems that might trap unwary explorers. But for the families of the missing workers, the media attention provided little comfort. Patricia Wells' husband, Dr. Michael Wells, spent years lobbying for renewed investigations and search efforts. His correspondence with state and federal agencies revealed a man consumed by the same desperate need for answers that had driven Sarah McKenna decades earlier. "My wife was a trained geologist with 15 years of field experience," Dr. Wells wrote to the FBI in 1980. "She would not have simply wandered off or fallen victim to some natural hazard without leaving some trace. Something deliberate happened to her and her colleagues, and I demand that the authorities treat this as the criminal matter it clearly is." Despite Dr. Wells' efforts, no criminal investigation was ever launched. The FBI's response cited a lack of evidence of federal crimes and referred the matter back to local authorities, who had already concluded their own investigation with a finding of accidental death due to unknown causes. The failure to find any trace of the 1978 victims, despite modern search techniques and equipment, only deepened the mystery surrounding Devil's Valley. How could 6 people, the original 3 from the Lone Star expedition, plus 3 more workers who disappeared in separate incidents during the following months, vanish so completely in an area that had been thoroughly mapped and surveyed? The answer, according to some researchers, might lie in the geological peculiarities of the valley itself. Dr. Raymond Koch, a geologist from the Colorado School of Mines, spent several years studying the area and proposed that the valley's unique rock formations might create natural phenomena that could explain at least some of the mysterious disappearances. The valley sits atop a complex network of limestone caverns and underground watercourses, Dr. Koch explained in a 1985 paper. It's possible that sudden ground collapses, triggered by seasonal freeze-thaw cycles, could create sinkholes large enough to swallow human beings. These collapses might then be concealed by subsequent rockfall or vegetation growth, leaving no surface evidence of what occurred. Koch's theory gained some support when ground-penetrating radar surveys in the 1990s detected several large voids beneath the valley floor, cavities that hadn't been present during earlier surveys. However, attempts to explore these underground spaces were thwarted by their apparent instability and the risk of triggering further collapses. The sinkhole theory provided a rational explanation for some aspects of the mystery, but it failed to account for other troubling details. Why would experienced miners and geologists venture into areas where ground instability was obvious? How could sinkholes explain the organized abandonment of the 1893 camp with its carefully arranged dinner settings and neatly folded belongings. More puzzling still, the sinkhole theory couldn't explain the continuing reports of strange phenomena in the valley. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, hikers, hunters, and Forest Service personnel reported encounters that defied rational explanation: voices calling from empty forest, lights moving through the trees at night, and the persistent sensation of being watched by unseen observers. Park Ranger Jennifer Martinez, who patrolled the area for 12 years, documented dozens of these reports in her official logs. "I've been working in these mountains my whole career," Martinez said in a 1996 interview, "and I've never encountered anything like what people report from that valley. The stories are too consistent, too detailed to dismiss as imagination or folklore." Martinez herself experienced the valley's strangeness firsthand during a routine patrol in 1994. According to her official report, she was conducting a wildlife survey when she heard what sounded like men's voices echoing from the forest around her. The voices seemed to be calling names, the same names that appeared on the list of the original missing miners. "I heard them clear as day," Martinez reported. "Timothy, Hans, Samuel, they were calling these names over and over, like they were looking for someone. But when I searched the area, I found no one. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once." The incident so unsettled Martinez that she requested reassignment to a different patrol area. Her replacement, Ranger David Kowalski, lasted only 3 months before making a similar request. In his resignation letter, Kowalski wrote, "There are places in these mountains where human beings are not meant to go. Devil's Valley is one of them." As the 21st century dawned, the mystery of the frozen camp had become deeply embedded in Colorado folklore, but serious investigation of the case had largely ceased. The valley itself was eventually designated as a protected wilderness area, partly to preserve its unique ecosystem, but also, according to some observers, to discourage further attempts at exploration or development. The official designation brought an end to mining activities in the area, but it did nothing to stop the steady stream of amateur investigators, paranormal researchers, and thrill-seekers drawn by the valley's dark reputation. Despite posted warnings and regular patrols, people continued to venture into the area, and a disturbing number of them never returned. Between 2000 and 2020, at least 12 individuals were reported missing in or around Devil's Valley. Unlike the mass disappearances of earlier decades, these were typically solo hikers or small groups who simply failed to return from day trips or overnight camping excursions. Search and rescue operations found no trace of most of these missing persons, adding their names to the growing list of people who had vanished in Colorado's most notorious location. The pattern of these modern disappearances was eerily consistent with the historical cases. Personal belongings were often found abandoned along trails, as if their owners had simply set them down and walked away. Camping equipment remained undisturbed, sometimes with food still cooking over camp stoves. Most disturbing of all, several of the missing individuals had been experienced outdoorsmen with extensive knowledge of mountain survival techniques. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a criminal psychologist who studied the case files in 2018, noted the psychological profile of many of the missing persons. These weren't reckless thrill-seekers or unprepared tourists. They were competent, experienced individuals who understood the risks of backcountry travel. The fact that they disappeared under circumstances that suggest sudden, unexplained abandonment of safety protocols is deeply troubling. The mystery took on new dimensions in 2019, when a team of paranormal investigators equipped with modern recording equipment spent a week in the valley. The team, led by researcher Marcus Sterling, captured hours of audio and video that they claimed provided evidence of supernatural activity in the area. The recordings, later analyzed by audio experts at the University of Denver, contained what appeared to be human voices speaking in the background of the investigators' conversations. Most remarkably, several of the voices seemed to be calling the names of the original missing miners, names that the investigators claimed they had never spoken aloud during their expedition. "We went in there as skeptics," Sterling said in a subsequent interview. "We were looking for rational explanations, natural phenomena that might account for the stories. What we found instead was evidence that something genuinely inexplicable is happening in that valley." The paranormal team's findings were met with predictable skepticism from the scientific community, but they sparked renewed public interest in the case. Online forums devoted to the mystery attracted thousands of participants, sharing theories, analyzing evidence, and planning their own expeditions to the valley. This renewed attention also brought unwanted scrutiny from federal authorities, who were increasingly concerned about the number of missing persons cases associated with the area. In 2020, the U.S. Forest Service implemented strict access controls for Devil's Valley, requiring permits for all visitors and limiting the number of people allowed in the area at any given time. The new restrictions were justified as necessary for environmental protection, but many observers believed they were actually intended to prevent further disappearances. "The government knows something they're not telling us," claimed conspiracy theorist and amateur investigator Robert Hayes. "They're not trying to protect the environment. They're trying to protect people from whatever is really happening in that valley." Today, more than 130 years after the original disappearance, the mystery of the frozen camp remains as compelling and unsolved as ever. The official count of missing persons associated with the valley has reached 37 individuals, making it one of the most statistically dangerous locations in North America. Yet, despite decades of investigation by law enforcement, scientists, and amateur researchers, no one has been able to provide a definitive explanation for why people continue to vanish in this remote Colorado valley. The theories remain as varied as ever: natural hazards like unstable ground or toxic gas emissions, psychological phenomena triggered by isolation and environmental stress, deliberate criminal activity by unknown perpetrators, or something far stranger that defies conventional explanation. Each theory has its proponents and its evidence, but none has been able to account for all aspects of this enduring mystery. What remains undeniable is the human cost of the valley's dark reputation. 37 people have lost their lives or disappeared under circumstances that suggest they met with something far worse than ordinary misfortune. Behind each name on that list is a family left without answers, friends haunted by unanswered questions, and a community that has learned to fear one of the most beautiful locations in their state. The story of the frozen camp serves as a reminder that even in our modern age of GPS tracking, satellite communication, and advanced search techniques, there are still places where people can vanish without a trace. It challenges our assumption that every mystery can be solved, every disappearance explained, every question answered if we just apply enough science and determination. Perhaps most unsettling of all, the continuing disappearances suggest that whatever claimed the lives of Marcus Thorne and his 13 companions in 1893 is still active in Devil's Valley today. Whether that force is natural or supernatural, human or something else entirely, it has proven remarkably persistent and effective at claiming victims while leaving behind no evidence of its methods or motives. For the people of Colorado, the frozen camp has become more than just a historical curiosity or tourist attraction. It represents something fundamental about the relationship between human beings and the natural world, a reminder that for all our technological advances and scientific understanding, there are still forces in the wilderness that we neither comprehend nor control. The valley itself remains as beautiful and pristine as it was when the first prospectors arrived in 1892. Its snow-capped peaks and crystal-clear streams showing no sign of the tragedies that have unfolded within its borders. But for those who know its history, that beauty is forever tainted by the knowledge of what lies hidden beneath its serene surface, the unmarked graves of dozens of people who ventured into paradise and found something far darker waiting for them. What do you think really happened here? Leave your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale, subscribe, hit the bell, and share with someone who loves history's darkest mysteries. See you in the next video.